Welcome, everyone, to the NewVision, OldWays podcast, a greatly ambitious journey of discovery where we can all learn to live better, mentally healthier, and more fulfilling lives. If you're just discovering us, feel free to go back and take the journey from the beginning. And if you're already a NewVision, OldWays fan, welcome back and enjoy season
7.
And now, here is your host, Tony Marinaccio.
You are listening to NewVision, OldWays, the podcast that explores timeless wisdom for the modern mind in a fun, relaxed, and most important, interactive way with you, the listener. I am your host, Tony Marinaccio, and let's get the episode started. Welcome, Visioneers, to another great episode of the NewVision, OldWays podcast. And we are now full steam ahead into season 7. And in the last episode, The Art of War and Peace, the liberation of Iran, I took a deep dive into how we are handling the Iran conflict, especially here in the U.S. And like I hoped, it sparked a lot of debates, opinions, and believe it or not, actual arguments. And I am so happy that the diverse group of visioneers that are out there were as engaged as they appeared to be. So that was awesome. And we know any war is a difficult subject to broach. No matter what side of the political fence you are on, we all want a quick resolution. And hopefully, when the smoke clears, we have accomplished actual peace, rebuilding, and the true freedom of the Iranian people that they so deserve. The general consensus of the discussions were what you would think. No matter what side of the political fence you are on, no one wants war. But in certain circumstances, military action is required. Hopefully, the Iranian regime falls as soon as possible and we can get to the rebuild stage and giving the Iranian people a brighter future. Check out the episode. It digs deep into what is going on out there. And now, with that, what do I have on tap for you today? Well, I want to dig into the issue that just will not seem to go away. And that is the important subject of conformity, independent thinking, and the survival of a free society. This is an episode that can and will hit home for many of you. I know it did for me, and I have always and will always feel that a society that loves and respects independent thinkers, whether you agree with them or not, is the basis for a free society. But we have slid down a path of, if you are on that side, and I have to hate you, disown you, chastise you, never speak to you again, especially if you voted for him. This concept of shutting down the other side simply because it's the other side is pure and simple a disease. It's a deliberate, forced upon many disease. And there is no better time than right now to help cure this disease by starting episode 64, Conformity, Independent Thinking, and the Survival of a Free Society.
First, safe spaces, the 2010 to 2015 era. This is where it all starts. Universities began treating speech as harm and disagreement as something that needs to be managed, contained, or avoided altogether. People need to be protected from ideas. Second, cancel culture, the 2016 to 2020 era. Once disagreement is framed as harmful, punishment follows. Reputations get destroyed, status gets stripped, and people are pushed out for stepping outside the accepted ideological line. People sought revenge for harmful ideas. Third, censorship, the 2021 to 2023 era. When cancel culture wasn't enough, when people kept speaking anyways, the response got worse. It was no longer about social backlash, but silence. If you had the wrong opinion, you don't get to speak at all. Fourth, structural exile, 2023 to 2025 era. Punishment became institutional. Careers, licenses, platforms, everything became conditional on your ideological allegiance. Disagree and you risk not being allowed to operate in society altogether. It is important to note that the human psyche has always viewed exile as the equivalent of death. Fifth, direct violence normalized, 2025 and onwards. Once someone is seen as harmful, dangerous, and unworthy of social participation, the final step is elimination. And since the Charlie Kirk assassination, you can see that line being crossed where lethal violence against political opponents is no longer unthinkable, but increasingly treated as justifiable. And if this movement continues to radicalize, the next stage is predictable: collective violence, group against group. If we keep pretending this this is all well-intentioned, we're not stopping that outcome, but clearing the path for it.
That was Liam from Liam Out Loud. And what he said in that rather long clip was spot on and very important, and sets us up for what we are talking about today. Let's start by considering a simple but uncomfortable question. How many opinions that you hold right now are truly your own? Not opinions inherited from a political tribe, not narratives reinforced by social media algorithms, not ideas absorbed from institutions or news outlets or cultural pressure, but ideas that you personally examined and challenged, wrestled with, and ultimately decided were true or false. Because if we are being honest with ourselves, that process of thinking, and I mean real thinking, is becoming increasingly rare in the modern world. And that realization brings us directly to the subject of today's episode as we continue exploring one of the most important struggles in human history, the battle between conformity and independent thinking. This conflict has existed for thousands of years. It did not begin with modern politics, social media, or the tensions of contemporary culture. From the philosophical debates of ancient Greece to the intellectual pressure shaping modern institutions, the same question continues to echo across time. Will individuals think for themselves, or will they surrender their judgment to the comfort and safety of the crowd? The answer to that question has determined the fate of entire civilizations. And if you think back to episode 47 of the NewVision, OldWays podcast, we explored the concept of groupthink, that powerful philosophical force where the desire for harmony within a group overrides the willingness to question the group itself. Groupthink is not simply about agreement. It is about the fear of disagreement. It emerges when individuals begin suppressing doubts in order to maintain social acceptance. People stop asking difficult questions, stop examining assumptions, and eventually begin repeating ideas not because they are convinced of their truth, but because disagreement carries consequences. Human beings are deeply sensitive to those consequences because we are tribal creatures by nature. We want belonging. We want acceptance. We want the security that comes from aligning ourselves with the people around us. But history reveals something remarkable about the progress of human civilization. Nearly every major advancement in science, philosophy, political freedom, and cultural understanding came from individuals who were willing to resist that tribal pressure and ask uncomfortable questions. Ancient Athens understood this tension perhaps better than any society before it. In the same civilization that gave birth to democracy and philosophical inquiry, we also witnessed one of the most famous examples of a society turning against an independent thinker. Socrates spent his life walking the streets of Athens, asking people to explain their beliefs about justice, morality, truth, and virtue. His method was simple but powerful. He asked questions. Those questions exposed contradictions in the thinking of his fellow citizens. And over time, the discomfort created by those questions grew into resentment. Eventually, the Athenian government accused him of corrupting the youth and sentenced him to death. His crime was not violence or corruption. His crime was intellectual independence. The story of Socrates reveals something profound about the human condition. Socrates often claimed to value free thinking, but when someone truly begins challenging the foundational assumptions of the culture, that person can quickly become a threat. Fast forward to the modern world, and we begin to see similar dynamics unfolding in places that once prided themselves on intellectual exploration: universities. Historically, university existed to train the mind to think critically. Students were expected to encounter competing ideas, wrestle with philosophical questions, debate political theories, and analyze evidence from multiple perspectives. A university was meant to be a marketplace of ideas where intellectual curiosity was encouraged rather than punished. But increasingly, we are witnessing something different unfold in many academic environments. Rather than encouraging open exploration, certain viewpoints are treated as settled truths, while alternative perspectives are dismissed before they are even examined. Students quickly learn that questioning the dominant narrative can bring social consequences, academic consequences, and sometimes even professional consequences. The pressure is rarely explicit. In fact, it is often subtle. It appears through grading bias, reputational pressure, or the understanding that certain questions simply should not be asked. Over time, students internalize the message. Some ideas are safe, other ideas are dangerous, and gradually a culture of intellectual caution begins to replace a culture of intellectual curiosity. Yet this phenomenon is not limited to universities. The entire modern information ecosystem encourages conformity in ways that previous generations could hardly imagine. Social media algorithms feed us information that reinforces what we already believe. News outlets increasingly tailor narratives to specific audiences rather than presenting competing viewpoints or simply the unskewed truth. Political tribes reward loyalty and punish dissent. In such an environment, many people begin to live within intellectual echo chambers, where their beliefs are constantly reinforced but rarely challenged. People may believe that they are thinking independently, when in reality, they are simply repeating ideas that circulate within their chosen tribe. Let me paint a picture that may feel familiar to many of you listening right now. Imagine a family sitting around a dinner table. Maybe it's Thanksgiving. Maybe it's a birthday. Maybe it's just a rare night when everyone finally manages to be together at the same time and in the same room. For years, these people have shared laughter, stories, memories, struggles, holidays, and the ordinary moments that form the fabric of a family. They may know each other's habits, their personalities, their quirks. They've helped one another through difficult times, and they've celebrated each other's successes. But then, somewhere in the middle of this evening, the conversation drifts into politics. Starts casually enough, someone mentions an election, a news story, a controversial decision made by a government leader. At first, the exchange is fairly polite, maybe even courteous, but then something changes. The tone shifts. Voices get sharper, the conversation stops being about ideas and begins turning into judgments about the people holding those ideas. Someone at the table realizes that a brother, a cousin, a parent, or a lifelong friend voted differently than they did. And suddenly, the atmosphere in the room becomes tense. Instead of curiosity, there is suspicion. Instead of conversation, there is accusation. Instead of asking, why do you see it that way? The question becomes, how could you possibly believe that? What was once a relationship built on years of shared experience is suddenly reduced to a single political label. In that moment, the complexity of human being disappears and is replaced by a category. Now you're a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, conservative, progressive, populist, whatever that label may be. And once that label takes hold, something tragic often follows. The person sitting across the table is no longer seen as a brother, sister, parent, or friend. They are seen as part of the other side. Conversation can become arguments. Arguments become resentment. Resentment becomes silence. And sometimes that silence lasts for months, years, or even the rest of a lifetime. Take the real-life example of Jimmy Kimmel's wife. If you have not seen or heard the clip, she is talking about how she has had to cut family members off simply because they voted for Donald Trump, which apparently means that they are not supporting her husband. The overwhelming self-righteousness of these people to think that how dare someone else have their own opinion? How dare you appear to be against my celebrity husband? Check this clip out.
And there's like a little bit of sympathy I have for people in my family that I feel are kind of being deliberately misinformed every day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
They're deliberately being misinformed every day. Mm-hmm. And they believe it. But it hurts me so much because of the personal relationship I now have where my husband is out there fighting this man. And to me, them voting for Trump is them not voting for my husband and me and our family. And I unfortunately have kind of lost relationships with people in my family because of it.
So apparently, Molly, if I'm getting this right, if someone has a different opinion in your family, they are deliberately misinformed. And of course, that is a direct offense to your unfunny late night talk show host husband who, and I have no idea why he thinks this way, is fighting this man, meaning Trump, who asked you to. And could you virtue signal any more deliberately on your end? When you step back and look at that situation honestly, something deeply troubling becomes clear. The most powerful relationships in our lives, the bonds of family and friendship, are increasingly being weakened by political tribalism. Instead of learning how to coexist with people who see the world differently, many people have begun treating political disagreement as a moral failing, so severe that it justifies cutting someone out of their lives entirely. But think about what that really means. A person who shared childhood memories with you, someone who stood beside you during important moments in life, someone who has known you for decades, can suddenly be dismissed as unacceptable because of a single vote cast in a ballot box. When we reach that point as a culture, we have moved far beyond political disagreement. We have allowed ideology to become stronger than human connection. And that is where the real danger lies. Because when political identity becomes more important than our relationships, we begin to lose something essential about what it means to live in a free society. Democracy was never meant to produce uniformity of thought. In fact, it depends on disagreement. The ability to coexist with someone who holds different views is not a weakness of democracy, it is the very foundation of it. When citizens lose the ability to argue passionately while still respecting one another as human beings, democracy itself begins to erode.
And now, Visioneers, let's take a quick break to let you know how you can support the show. By clicking on the Patreon donate link in the show notes, or by typing in patreon.com/NewVisionOldWays, or at the NewVisionOldWays.com website, you can show your support by donating directly to the New Vision Old Ways podcast. These episodes take time and money to produce, and by donating what you are able to, it will allow us to grow the show and give you the best content that we can. Of course, you can cancel at any time. Remember, click on the Patreon donate link in the show notes, or by typing in patreon.com/NewVisionOldWays, or at the NewVisionOldWays.com website. Hint, you are able to donate a one-time lump sum. Then, cancel right after. Options are always a good thing. Thank you, and now, back to the show.
When we step back and examine history more carefully, we begin to notice a pattern. Large institutions have almost always preferred conformity. Governments prefer conformity because it produces stability and predictability. Corporations prefer conformity because it produces reliable consumers. Political movements prefer conformity because it produces loyal supporters. Independent thinkers, though, disrupt that order. They ask inconvenient questions, expose contradictions, and challenge comfortable narratives. And that is precisely why independent thinkers have often been treated as threats throughout history. Galileo challenged the accepted understanding of the universe and faced condemnation from the authorities of his time. In the 20th century, Alexander Solzhenitsyn exposed the brutal realities of Soviet oppression and the Gulag system and was imprisoned and exiled for telling the truth. Václav Havel wrote essays describing how individuals could resist systems built on lies simply by choosing to live honestly. Imagine that. And for that, he was repeatedly imprisoned by the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. Yet history has a strange habit of vindicating those who refuse to conform. Galileo's ideas reshaped science. Solzhenitsyn's writings helped expose the moral bankruptcy of the Soviet system. And Havel eventually became president of a free Czech Republic. This brings us to an intriguing realization about the modern world. For most of human history, controlling ideas required physical force. Books could be burned, dissenters imprisoned, and newspapers censored. But today, something far more subtle has emerged. Instead of controlling ideas through brute force, modern systems often shape thinking through influence. Algorithms determine which information reaches us. Media ecosystems filter which stories dominate public conversation. Social pressures shape which opinions people feel comfortable expressing. In such an environment, conformity begins to feel natural, even voluntary. People may believe they are thinking freely when in reality, they are not operating within carefully constructed intellectual boundaries. And that leads us to a fascinating possibility. In the modern world, the most radical act a person can commit may not be loud activism or public outrage. The most radical act may simply be thinking for yourself. But here is where the story takes an even deeper philosophical turn, because independent thinking is not merely a personal virtue. It may be, in fact, the foundation upon which free societies depend. Democracies, unlike authoritarian systems, rely on citizens who are capable of evaluating information, weighing competing arguments, and making thoughtful decisions about the direction of their country. A free society cannot function if its citizens simply outsource their thinking to political parties, media outlets, cultural influencers, or academic institutions. When individuals stop thinking critically, democracy itself begins to weaken. In that sense, the battle between conformity and independent thinking is not simply a cultural issue or an academic issue. It is a civilizational issue. To think independently today means stepping outside the comfortable echo chambers that dominate modern discourse. It means listening to people you disagree with without immediately dismissing them. It means examining evidence carefully before reacting emotionally. It means resisting the human instinct to divide the world into allies and enemies based solely on ideology. Independent thinking requires humility because it forces us to confront the possibility that our own beliefs may be incomplete or even incorrect. But it is precisely this discipline that strengthens both individuals and societies. Civilizations are not defined by how loudly their citizens agree. They are defined by how courageously their citizens think. And perhaps the future of free societies will not ultimately be determined by elections or political movements alone, but by whether individuals retain the courage to question narratives and examine ideas honestly. Because the real battle may ultimately be fought in the minds of individuals, the battle between comfort and curiosity, between belonging and honesty, between repeating what you are told and discovering what is actually true. The societies that endure are not ones where everyone thinks the same way. They are ones where individuals still possess the courage to ask the questions that every generation must eventually confront. Is this actually true? And the moment a society stops asking that question may very well be the moment it begins to lose the very freedom they allowed it to flourish in the first place. It may be worth remembering something that history teaches us again and again. Societies rarely collapse because people disagree. Disagreement has always existed, and in many ways, disagreement is the engine of progress. Citizens grow stronger when ideas are debated, challenged, refined, and improved through honest conversation. The real danger begins when disagreement turns into dehumanization, as when we stop seeing one another as fellow citizens, neighbors, friends, and family members, and instead reduce one another to political identities. Because once that happens, the very fabric that holds a society together begins to fray. When a brother stops speaking to his sister because of an election, when lifelong friendships are severed over a vote cast in a ballot box, when parents and children sit across from one another, not with curiosity, but with suspicion, something deeper than politics has been lost. We have allowed ideology to replace humanity. And when that happens, the battle between conformity and independent thinking takes on an even greater meaning. Independent thinking is not simply about rejecting popular narratives or questioning institutions. At its core, independent thinking requires something much more difficult: the willingness to see complexity in a world that constantly pushes us towards simple categories. It asks us to recognize that a person can disagree with us politically and still be thoughtful, moral, intelligent, and worthy of respect. It reminds us that no single political ideology contains the entirety of human wisdom, and that humility, intellectual humility, may be one of the most important virtues a free society can cultivate. The truth is that democracy was never designed for people who all think the same way. I can't say that enough. It was designed for people who can argue passionately while still living together peacefully. It was designed for citizens who understand that disagreement is not betrayal. It was designed for a society where ideas compete, where arguments are tested, and where the best ideas rise not through intimidation, but through persuasion. But that system only works if individuals retain the courage to think for themselves. Because the moment we outsource our thinking entirely to tribes, parties, institutions, or algorithms, we begin surrendering something essential, not just our independence of thought, but the very freedom that depends upon it. And so perhaps the real challenge facing our generation is not simply political, it is philosophical, it is cultural, it is deeply personal. Will we allow ourselves to be divided into camps that refuse to listen to one another? Or will we rediscover the older, harder tradition of intellectual curiosity? The willingness to ask questions, examine evidence, challenge assumptions, and most importantly, remain open to the possibility that we may not have all the answers. Because the health of any free society ultimately depends on its citizens who can do something remarkably simple, but remarkably difficult at the same time: to think clearly and to speak honestly. And to remember that the person sitting across the table from us is not the enemy, but a fellow human being trying to make sense of the same complicated world. And that, my friends, may be the most important act of independence we have left. I want to leave you with a passage from one of the most influential books of all time, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And it reads like this: "Just as a gardener cultivates his plot, keeping it free from weeds, and growing the flowers and fruits which he requires, so may a man tend the garden of his mind, weeding out all the wrong, useless, and impure thoughts, and cultivating toward perfection the flowers and fruits of right, useful, and pure thoughts. By pursuing this process, a man sooner or later discovers that he is the master gardener of his soul, the director of his life. He also reveals within himself the laws of thought, and understands with every increasing accuracy how the thought forces and the mind elements operate in the shaping of his character, circumstances, and destiny."
So, what did you think of this episode or any of the episodes? We would love to find out. And here is where to get a hold of the show and let us know. These are in the show notes, but as always, here they are. There is a Patreon support link in the show notes and on the NewVision OldWays.com website that you can click on that will allow you to donate to the show and show your support. By donating what you can, it will allow us to book guests and cover costs. Anything will help. Cancel anytime. You can also message the show from each episode on your various platforms. Just look for the Send Us a Text Message link. If that doesn't work for you, you can email us at newvisionoldways@gmail.com. You can find us on what was Twitter, now X, at NewVisionOldWay, no S on that one. Check the New Vision Old Ways YouTube channel. Type in New Vision, one word, Old Ways, one word, channel, and please subscribe. It is free and will show support for the show. It really means a lot and will help grow the show on YouTube. Find us on Facebook, New Vision Old Ways, podcast you should easily find us. And as a reminder, these are still growing platforms for us and expanding all the time, so we need your help to get the flow going with the community. And last but not least, if you can do me a huge favor and subscribe to us, like us, follow us, leave a review on whatever platform you found us on. That would be so appreciated. That will also help secure guests that we will be booking in the future. So, here we are, Season 7. We have a lot to cover, so thank you for listening. We can't wait to get your input, and I also can't wait until we get together for the next episode of New Vision Old Ways. Until then, stay true to yourself, stay informed, and stay empowered.
But the most important thing is...
This episode and all the episodes of New Vision Old Ways podcast have been written, engineered, and produced by Tony Marinaccio and TKM Productions.